This is a very important message for African economic emancipation. Before we can think about controlling our economies and ensuring that we begin to become independent of European monopoly, we must understand that the beginning of all African economies is food. Without food, you do not have the strength and energy to work and produce an economy. So the African economy starts with food. And what is beginning to happen in Africa, in the same way that debt has been used to colonize Africa, they are now beginning to utilize seeds and food to colonize Africa. Now, with debt, Africa can choose not to take debt. But with food, which you need to eat on a daily basis 3 times a day, if you get colonized with food, you have no way of escaping that colonization. And what the West is doing right now in Africa is they are working to destroy African seeds so that Africans do not have the ability to produce their own food, but they have to depend on the West to produce food. How are they doing this? They are doing this by creating something called genetically modified seeds and hybrid seeds. Hybrid seeds and genetically modified seeds have been created in the laboratory to ensure that they do not reproduce in the following seasons after you've planted the first crop that you bought. The reason they do this is that they use something called a terminator gene or a genetic use restriction technology that makes a seed not reproduce once it's produced for the first time. Not only is that the problem, but when you grow these genetically modified seeds and these hybrids, it's very important for you to understand that a hybrid and a genetically modified seed are 2 separate things, but they achieve the same result. So when you use this genetically modified seed in your soil, once it starts producing flowers, those flowers are able to cross-pollinate or to drift and pollinate organic seeds that are already found in Africa and turn those seeds into genetically modified seeds so that they also have this terminator gene or this genetic use restriction technology to stop African farmers from regrowing their food for next season. So here is the problem. Many Zimbabweans think that Zimbabwe is not able to produce food now because of the drought and because farms were taken from white farmers and given to black farmers. That is not the truth. The truth is Zimbabweans are failing to produce because it used to cost a Zimbabwean farmer, a small-scale black farmer in Zimbabwe, 0 cents and just labor to produce a hectare of food. But today, these Zimbabwean farmers were persuaded by companies like Seedco to get rid of their traditional seeds that used to be able to reproduce, and they were given these hybrids that do not reproduce or that continue to have reducing reproduction until they stop reproducing. Now the Zimbabwean farmer doesn't have that seed that can reproduce, so every season the Zimbabwean farmer must go and buy new seeds. And these hybrids do not just grow, but they need fertilizers and chemicals to make them grow. So the Zimbabwean farmer must buy new seeds every season, fertilizer and pesticides to protect these hybrids. So now to produce a hectare in a village costs a farmer nothing less than $250 to buy the seeds together with the fertilizer for him to grow the food. This is a problem that is causing Zimbabwe to lose its food self-sufficiency. And the problem is that all the PhD graduates, master's degree graduates, and graduates that are teaching our people how to farm in Zimbabwe come from an education system created by the very same organizations in America that are selling these hybrid seeds and chemicals. So that's why we are in a cycle where we continue to produce food unsustainably in Zimbabwe, listening to graduates. Right now, the permanent secretary of agriculture in Zimbabwe, I think his name is John Basera, came from this company called Seedco that is owned by Lima Grain of France, while Lima Grain of France is owned by Monsanto, the American company that is the biggest producer of GMOs and chemicals that are used in farming. These very same organizations work with an institution in which Strive Masiyiwa was the chairman that is called AGRA, that belongs to the Rockefeller Foundation, together with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to control food in the world and to ensure that Africa comes into food colonialism. This institution was started by Kofi Annan so that they could get the trust of Africans to control African food and to put Africa into food colonization. The main reason I speak against Strive Masiyiwa is because he is bringing food colonialism to Africa through these GMOs, hybrids, and all this that they call agricultural technology of chemicals that destroys our soils and destroys Africa's ability to reproduce food. These are the things that we are supposed to start talking about when we are talking about emancipation of Africa and economic emancipation of Africans. There is no independence in Africa if your food is controlled by the Americans, the Swiss, and the Germans. Pass this message to every African. Make them understand that it is important to maintain traditional seeds. It is important to eat only food that has got seeds so that you have the ability to reproduce your food. There is no other bigger message about economic emancipation that beats this. And that is why our organizations, Zimbabwe Unite Against U.S. War Sanctions, or ZWAUS, is working to preserve traditional seeds and working to promote non-GMO food so that we can begin to grow our non-GMO farmers, organic farmers, and destroy GMO farmers. Hi guys, so today I want to give you an update of my cases against Innscor. South Africa, Innscor versus Rutendo Matinyarare, Zimbabwe, Grain Millers Association versus Rutendo Matinyarare. So some of you might not know what these cases are about, so I'll give you a little bit of a background. Last year, I made a very emotional video in which I was talking about the problem of food in Zimbabwe, saying that the food in Zimbabwe no longer tastes the same. Our beef used to be the best in the world. We used to export it all across the world. And now our beef doesn't taste the same because it's no longer grass-fed, but it is pen-fed by food and feed that is coming from mainly a monopoly by the name of Innscor that also is monopolizing our pork feed, our chicken feed, and also our fast food and processed foods. And I said the problem was Innscor had destroyed our food by giving us non-traditional ways of growing our food, plus they were putting GMOs, we had toxic chemicals like glyphosate in our food, and we also had aspects like MSG in our food, which is said to be inimical in many parts of the world where they now want it labeled, or they've actually banned it outright, like what they've done in Pakistan. Now, who is Innscor? Innscor is a food producing company. It produces food for animal feed. It also produces human food and has milling companies, food processing companies, and fast food outlets in over 10 African countries that reach over 100 million people. This company is a monopoly, and it is a monopoly that is seemingly destroying small players and small competitors. Hence, I began to raise some of the issues that I've raised. So by me pointing out that they've got GMOs, glyphosate, MSG and other toxins in their food, they decided to take me to the South African courts to ask the South African courts to issue a defamatory order to stop me from speaking against them. Now, what a defamatory order does is it stops a person from speaking falsehoods, lies, and negativities that are false to destroy the reputation of a brand or a person. And so brands and persons have every right to protect themselves from such malicious destruction of their image. However, it is only when those things that are being said are false, not true, and malicious to destroy the image of an organization. Now, once I was hit by this defamatory claim, I decided to prove that my allegations were true by getting scientific lab tests from globally certified international food companies in South Africa, Italy, and Germany. So I took Innscor's feed, chicken feed, pork feed, I took their fast food, I took their tomato sauce, I took their milk, I took everything for tests for bovine growth hormone, took them for tests for GMOs, took them for tests for glyphosate, toxic chemicals, MSG, you name it, we undertook those tests. And the tests came back positive. They came back positive for GMOs, they came back positive for MSG, they came back positive for glyphosate, and we're still testing for other inimical chemicals and heavy metals in their food, and those results will come out in time. As we got that evidence and that information, we number one started to look for a reconsideration application in the South African courts and in the Zimbabwean courts against the gag orders that they've been given. We want a reversal of the gag order in South Africa on the basis that they have no jurisdiction for a Zimbabwean company that produces food in Zimbabwe, does not produce food in South Africa, taking a Zimbabwean who is complaining about Zimbabwean food and a Zimbabwean company to a South African court that must now determine what we as Zimbabweans talk about in our own country pertaining to a national interest issue like food and health. So we're saying that Innscor has no business coming to the South African courts, and that reconsideration application is currently in the courts, but also being delayed by Innscor, which doesn't want this case to be set down, because when it was set down on the 13th of March, they brought in some delaying tactics, but irrespective, we shall win that. Then when we began to publish the results of the fact that Innscor had GMOs in its food, had glyphosate in its food, had MSG in its food, they then decided to go to court on the 19th of March to ask for me to be charged with contempt of court. The advocates then came and asked for the courts to allow for an out-of-court negotiation and potential out-of-court settlement. They then offered us an agreement, and this agreement asked for us to remove 4 articles that they were not happy with. And if we remove those 4 articles, we begin to negotiate so that we can come to an out-of-court settlement. In our negotiation, we would have wanted simple things: the labeling of their food, the removal of GMOs from their food, and also the removal of MSG and other toxins from their food so that Zimbabweans can eat better food. We also want them to give us an option, some grass-fed beef and not just this pen-fed food that is fed by their toxic animal feeds. So here are a number of problems with what has been going on in the case so far. Innscor has every right to protect itself from me lying or giving falsehoods about their brand with the intention of destroying their brand. The difference is I have not spoken any lies, and I can prove that scientifically, and I can also prove that by the information that is in the public domain, so they have no grounds to try and silence me for facts and truths that can be proved. Because once they try to silence me from facts and truth, that is no longer defamation. They are now seeking to silence me and take away my right for freedom of speech. And they're also trying to stop me from being a whistleblower for the criminal activities that they've undertaken. How have they undertaken criminal activities? They've undertaken criminal activities in that when we tested their food, the government of Zimbabwe had not yet issued permission for GMOs to be brought into Zimbabwe, but we found GMOs in Innscor's animal feed. So the fact that there was GMOs in Innscor's animal feed before the government of Zimbabwe gives permission for GMOs to be brought into the country means that they were in contravention of Zimbabwean laws. Innscor itself says we have been given the permission to bring in these GMOs by the National Biotech Authority. But the National Biotech Authority cannot give licenses for GMOs to be brought into Zimbabwe without a statutory instrument backing up such GMO imports, because Zimbabwe is a non-GMO country, it's a non-GMO importing country unless we have droughts. Now, National Biotech Authority cites a 2018 statutory instrument. But in Zimbabwe, statutory instruments only last for a year. And when a statutory instrument has reached its year, it must be extended. But it must be extended based on the grounds of, for instance, being a drought and Zimbabwe not having enough food. But since 2018, Zimbabwe has had a number of bumper harvests. So why would the government continue to renew the importation of GMOs at a time where we've got enough of our own non-GMO food in the country? So the statutory instrument is questionable if it had actually been properly extended and is properly being used for it to last 6 years until today. The fact that Cabinet said to give permission to bring in GMOs for animal feed only and only maize BT illustrates that there was no permission prior to bringing GMOs. We also heard the Minister of Agriculture saying that in Zimbabwe it is illegal for anybody to bring food that is GMO to feed human beings. But we have taken a number of Innscor's food products like meat and also maize meal, and it has come out positive for GMOs. First of all, this box is coming from Durban, from one of our labs, who had also taken the samples through to Germany for the glyphosate test, because those cannot be done in South Africa. And over here, we have Chibataura. Chibataura is produced by Blue Ribbon, and Chibataura was tested for GMOs and glyphosate, and it came positive for GMOs. It also came back positive for glyphosate. But you have nowhere here where Innscor has labeled its food to say that it has got GMOs or to say that it has got toxic chemicals like glyphosate. So our customers are not being informed. Our customers in Zimbabwe think that they're eating non-GMO food when clearly they're eating GMO food without being warned. This is illegal. According to the Minister of Agriculture, there shouldn't be GMOs in our human food. Here it is in Chibataura. This is a national foods product. It's called Palenta, another Innscor company. In here is also GMOs and glyphosate. The highest amount of glyphosate was found in this. This product also contains GMOs, also contains glyphosate. It's an Innscor product. There is no labeling, yet the Zimbabwean government said they must label if they are GMOs. We don't have any warning that there are GMOs in this. This is Sturpol. It is not produced by Innscor, but produced by another miller in Zimbabwe. They have got GMOs in this millie meal. There is no labeling, there is no branding. This again is a contravention of the laws of Zimbabwe, a contravention of the permissions given by our cabinet, because they've got GMOs in human feed without labeling and without any license from the government to bring in these GMOs. All these packs are coming from this box that was sent to us by the laboratory after taking samples to test for glyphosate and GMOs, and all the three products were found positive. This brings me now to the fact that Grain Millers Association also went to seek a gag order against me. In that gag order, they're asking the courts to silence me from speaking about Innscor or saying that Innscor has got GMOs, glyphosate in their food. But that has become factual. So why did Innscor and the Grain Millers Association go and seek gag orders for something that is factual and something that grain millers in the Harare courts admits to the fact that they are actually bringing in GMOs and their members are bringing in GMOs, including Innscor, because they've been given licenses by the National Biotech Authority. But at the same time, the National Biotech Authority is also saying anybody who's bringing in GMOs into the country illegally is breaking the law. So anyone bringing in GMOs into Zimbabwe right now for human consumption is breaking the law according to what the Minister of Agriculture said and according to what Cabinet said. Anybody who was bringing in GMOs prior to Cabinet giving permission for the importation of maize only for animal consumption is also breaking the law and was breaking the law. Now the question is, what is the government of Zimbabwe going to do? Because I have clearly exhibited that Innscor has broken the law, and now they're trying to use the South African courts and the Zimbabwean courts to silence me as a whistleblower who has been exposing the criminality and the corruption that has seen us bringing in GMOs into Zimbabwe when they were not allowed. Finally, we tested the GMOs that are in Innscor's animal feed and human food. We have already agreed that human food with GMOs is illegal. But they were only permitted to bring in maize, BT maize strain, and yet we found over 18 different strains of GMOs in Innscor's animal feed. And the question is, where are they getting those GMOs? And they were authorized to only bring in GMOs from South Africa, yet many of their GMOs are not authorized in South Africa. So, where are they getting these GMOs? Innscor is supposed to have an outgrowers program in Zimbabwe. The outgrowers are supposed to grow their maize, wheat, and also soya beans, but we didn't find non-GMOs in their feed. So what is it that the outgrowers in Zimbabwe are growing? The government of Zimbabwe has got to test the feed and food that is being produced on Innscor's farms. They've got to determine if GMOs are not being grown in Zimbabwe by Innscor and other companies. And as for the Grain Millers Association, you have been given permission by the government of Zimbabwe to bring in animal feed, but not human feed. So if Grain Millers Association members are bringing in GMOs for human feed, is this not breaking the law? And finally, many companies, small milling companies, have been destroyed by the fact that when they wanted to bring in maize into Zimbabwe, they were forced to buy locally non-GMO maize because they were not allowed to bring in GMOs. But they are complaining that part of why they could not compete in the marketplace and part of why they had to close shop is because they were forced to buy non-GMO maize, which is more expensive, while millers like Innscor were bringing in GMOs even without the permission of cabinet and without a statutory instrument to back it up. So companies have been destroyed in the process by big players and certain members of the Grain Millers Association bringing in GMOs at a time when everybody else was being forced to bring in non-GMOs. The GMO issue is a national security threat issue. It is a health issue, and it could potentially be a chemical and a biological warfare against the country. And this is why I speak about it, and it cannot be that a South African court can tell us as Zimbabweans what we can talk about as a sovereign nation and actually gag us from talking about a national interest issue that touches all Zimbabwean lives and touches our national security.